one major problem or one major problem with Paul that gets overlooked, I think, is that the question really arises: how did Paul communicate with the disciples? We know that Paul only spoke two languages, Greek and Hebrew, according to the New Testament. There's no evidence that Paul knew of Aramaic, so how the hell did he communicate with the disciples? Because according to Ehrman's view, if we read Ehrman's book Forge right here, he talks about how the disciples only knew Aramaic and didn't know Greek. Other scholars agree with him. Other Christian, even Christian scholars do agree with him. To Do agree with that to an extent. So if Jesus' disciples only spoke Aramaic, and if Paul only spoke and wrote in Hebrew and Greek, how the hell did Paul communicate with the disciples? That means since Paul was preaching to Gentile areas like Rome, modern day Turkey, etc., he would have gotten away with anything. So he could have made up Jesus' death and resurrection without confirming it with the disciples, because again, we read in Galatians 1 that Paul's not getting his information from any man, that means the disciples, nor was he taught it from the disciples, Peter, James, etc. He's getting it from revelation. So when Paul is saying in Galatians 1 that he's getting revelations, he's getting the gospel by revelations, he could have went to these Gentile lands and preached his version of Christianity without confirming it with the disciples. Because again, how could he communicate with them? He couldn't communicate with them because they knew Aramaic and he knew Greek and Hebrew. So how did he communicate with them? So any way you look at it, Paul's a problem for Christianity, because we know he's making stuff up and we know he's not communicating with the disciples. Even if he was, he could be making things up about Jesus in these Gentile churches. Because again, keep in mind that Peter and Thomas and James and all the disciples were preaching to the Jews while Paul was preaching to the Gentiles. That means Paul's version of Christianity was more successful than the disciples, because they were preaching to the Jews, and we know that the Jews weren't listening to them. But Paul was preaching to the Gentile. He opened it up to the Gentiles, so that's why his version of Christianity beat out the disciples' version. And again, you have the problem of communication. How did Paul communicate with them? Any way you look at it, it's a problem for Paul.